Uh, Welcome everyone. Welcome to Agile-DevOps DFW. Let's get started. Today we're going to talk about a more technical topic, edge computing, DevOps, and we'll try and connect the dots between the topic at hand and Agile organizations, right? So I'm glad to have one of my best friends, Vamsi, who's been kind enough to help us explore this topic today. Before we dive in, from a logistics perspective, the attendees are going to be in listen-only mode. I will be monitoring the chat panel, the Q&A panel. I'd love to get questions, comments from you. And as I see those questions coming in, I'm probably going to bring them up in the moment. If it feels like a question might be better handled at the end, then we'll just hold them at the end, all right? So that's just a little bit about the logistics of the webinar and how you and I can interact during the course of this event, right? Let me tell you a little bit about our meetup. Around 6 years ago in October, 3 of us got together, Victor, Fred, and I, in a Barnes & Noble here in Dallas, and we cooked up this conspiracy, Agile-DevOps DFW, and now I think we are over 2,000 people. Thank you to all our passionate community members. Our purpose was when Victor, Fred, and I created this meetup, we wanted to create a meetup in the Dallas-Fort Worth area that explored the intersection of Agile and DevOps. And that's been our theme, our North Star since we used to just have one event a month, first Thursday, 6 p.m. Central. But off late, we've had so much content that we are struggling to have, we were struggling to keep up with the content. So that's a nice problem. So we created a new slot, which is this slot, third Thursday, 11 Central. Try to have alternate Agile DevOps topics. I'm always looking for DevOps and technical speakers. So if you're passionate or if you know someone who you feel is an expert, send them my way. I'd love to have them speak at our event, okay? In case you miss any of our events, all of our, especially in the post-COVID era, all of our events are available offline, and you can watch the recording on the playlist, on the webinar playlist on the Smooth Apps YouTube channel. So that's a little bit about the history of our meetup, the focus of our meetup, and some logistical information, right? A little bit about my company, Smooth Apps. We specialize in Agile training, coaching, consulting, Agile transformation. We are proud to be affiliated with Scrum.org, the home of Scrum, which was founded by Ken Schwaber. So we've got a network of 325 Scrum.org professional Scrum trainers across the world. And we are honored to have many of them to be our partners. And we've helped each other on large transformations. So chances are, if you have a need in any part of the world for Agile training, coaching, consulting, we can find you an awesome partner to help you, okay? In terms of Smooth Apps, this is just a quick peek of some of our offerings. We help with Agile executive alignment, product owner bootcamp, Agile quick launch, Agile enablement. We've got many more products and services. And if you have needs in any of these, and if you want to explore if we might be able to help you, give us a call, send me an email, or connect with me on LinkedIn. We'd be happy to have an exploratory conversation, right? If you don't have the budget, you want to learn, and the way we think resonates with you, plenty of free resources. Go to smoothapps.com, check out our blogs. One of our most popular blogs is the job description for the product owner, 14 stances of product ownership. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. A lot of our videos have been getting traction, like, are you too modern for Agile? What does it mean to be an Agile manager? What are the most important questions for Agile transformation? So the questions that our clients are asking us over and over again, we try to answer them proactively and make them available free of cost to the community. So subscribe to our YouTube channel. Got a bunch of free presentations on our SlideShare account. Got a bunch of webinars, recordings. Of course, this is the meetup. Spread the word with your colleagues. And follow us on LinkedIn. We try to share inspiring content, some motivational quotes, tidbits of Agile tips and tricks, blogs, and so on. All right. So if you don't have the budget, you still want to learn, plenty of free ways to learn from Smooth Apps. All right. With that, I want to introduce you to Vamsi. Vamsi and I went to college together, computer science. We started our journey into the software world together. We were actually lab mates, which means in India, all the laboratories, electrical engineering, I still get hives when I think about those labs. From electrical engineering, where we're dealing with machines with 440 volts of electricity and scared of getting electrocuted to death, to Fortran, to Pascal, to C. I don't know how many labs Vamsi and I have worked on together. So I've known him for, since 1994. I'm really old. And I'm honored to have him speak. So with that, I will introduce you to Vamsi. Vamsi, please take it away.
Great. Thanks, Ravi. Can you hear me? Hear me well?
Yes. Yep. We can hear you well.
Perfect. So, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, folks. Wherever you might be joining me from, it's my honor to present to you all. And Ravi and I go ways back. And I've always thought he was a better developer than he's an agile coach or whatever he's doing now. So again, that's just my my personal thought. But again, glad to be here. And today I want to talk to you about a lot of the work I'm doing, or the various customers I'm involved with from a Fortune 500 perspective are doing around cloud native app development to hybrid clouds to edge computing, right? And it's so funny that the industry has been talking about digital transformation all of these years. And due to the lack of technical capabilities, or due to human resistance, those initiatives have kind of been plodding along till the COVID pandemic came along. And it's completely pushing us to change because of the fact that, we are fundamentally changing the way we are living, the way we are working. And, everything's got to be remote now, more virtual collaboration. And even a lot of the entertainment has moved to online streaming or AR, VR, so on and so forth. So we'll talk about all of that. And just a few quick words of introduction about myself, Ravi. Go to the next slide. Thank you, sir. So again, I work as a chief strategist or the chief strategy officer for a startup in Sunnyvale, California. I'm based out of Philadelphia, but I travel the globe. Before COVID, I would basically be on a plane pretty much 100 days a year, and working with global banks, global insurance companies, a lot of telcos as well with edge computing, and I'll share some of those stories today. And when I can keep up with all of this stuff, I blog. I try to blog at a decent cadence, so I've not been doing it as regularly as before. I think with COVID, a lot of the startups are doing well because our customers now get the importance of DevOps, digital practices, digital applications, and trying to move more offline applications online, as well as retooling or replatforming legacy applications. So I've been doing that at Platform 9. So I do a lot of strategy work, a lot of product development, and internal evangelization, but I also do spend time in marrying all of these different trends in cloud computing, AI, big data, BPM, and DevOps. So prior to jumping to Platform 9, I spent a few months as a CTO for a fintech, SaaS-based cloud that we were delivering for risk management. Got that bootstrapped and then moved on. And then prior to that, I spent almost a decade at Red Hat as the chief architect of global financial services. So again, that's a company I take a lot of pride in. When I started there, we were about 1,500 people. We had grown to 15,000 when I left. But a lot of good open source activity around not just the bread and butter operating system area, but also cloud computing with OpenStack, technologies such as cloud management platforms, Kubernetes, and then OpenShift. And then I also spent 2 years as a GM of banking for Hortonworks. Again, worked with a lot of banks and insurance companies globally in those 2 years. So again, it's not one thing I do. I like to dabble in a variety of different things and going deep as required. But what really drives my interest is how all of these mega trends come together to solve vertical problems, right? Technology by itself does not live in isolation. People talk about 5G now, but 5G really is about vertical apps and what capabilities can be enabled in healthcare, connected car, telecommunications, video streaming, so on and so forth. So with that in mind, I know we didn't overpack the slides today, so we'll be going through the slides at some length. Please feel free to type your questions for Ravi and myself, and we'll keep this interactive, if you will. So Ravi, next slide, please. So thanks, Ravi. So let's talk about what we're going to do in this webinar, right? So my goal here would be to convey to you what edge computing is, talk about what edge looks like from the perspective of industry platforms. What are some of the common definitions people will throw around in this space? And then what are some of the key capabilities that edge platforms should be enabling? And then I have a case study of an actual client that I'm working with. Let me just say that they're a global Fortune 50 retailer. And for confidentiality purposes, I'm unable to put their names in the slide. We'll talk about what edge means in their context and how the life cycle of a solution that's based on containers, Docker, Kubernetes looks like when deployed in the edge scenario. And then Ravi and I'll have some dialogue about how edge relates to Agile. And at his request, I've put some curated resources for you all to go back and just take a look at. Again, it's a very dynamic field, and it's a field that's going to dominate computing for at least the next 10, 15 years, the edge space. So I'm sure there's more than 5, at a minimum, there's 500. So these are some of the blogs that I referred to, or some of the publications that I regularly look up. Now, one caveat here, when we first took a cut of the slides over the last week, the feeling was the slides were a little too deep in architecture and stuff like that. For those of you who would like to get a taste of what this looks like under the covers, please feel free to email Ravi or myself, and then I'll be glad to pass you some of those architecture slides. But as well, please feel free to bring up any questions you have, and we'll any technical questions you have, and we'll be glad to address them as well. So Ravi, next slide. So let's do an introduction. What is edge computing, right? And I got this really nice picture from a website. I should credit them. But the idea is that I mentioned the fact that with the pandemic, we are increasingly relying on an ability to do things via remote communications, right? And that includes what we're doing now, which is remote work, virtual collaboration. My 5-year-old, he's 6 actually, my son, is big time into online gaming, while his sister, who's 14, did not even know what that was at that age, right? Everything is an app to him, the way he looks at it. He touches the surface, he expects it to react at very low latency. And I think that is the definition of the next generation consumer, right? The Gen Z consumer. The fact that they are going to expect highly responsive applications that we've been talking about for a long time, since the advent of Java. But also the fact that with 5G technology, wireless networks are going to bring you the throughput, the low latency, and the speed that even their wired counterparts have lacked. So some of you might have seen, you're from Dallas, I assume some of you or most of you are from Texas. Verizon just put a note out talking about their 5G launch, and they're boosting their investments in the network infrastructure by hundreds of millions of dollars to put in more capabilities so that applications can deal with or can be based on the dramatic increase in network speed that's going to be developing, right? So that's the global picture. But what does that have to do with edge computing? So let me define edge computing first, and then we'll go from there. I'll walk you through the slide. Edge computing is the notion that, unlike in the past where your applications resided in a data center, and they still do, the application now does not completely reside in the data center, but there's a good portion or all of the application that's going to reside where your customers are making contact with you. So if you look at the circle in the middle, that could be a restaurant where people are going in there ordering food, and there could be a handheld device that the waitress or the waiter uses to basically put in your order. You already see this, but what if you could basically do more things in terms of suggest more items to customers for them to purchase at a restaurant or at a store based on what they've already ordered, right? Is it possible that a restaurant maintains a profile of a user, his or her preferences, and then tries to maximize revenue per client? So we're seeing this already in a lot of drive-through type restaurants. And it doesn't have to be all customer-facing applications. It could also be applications that deal with payment processing, applications that deal with supply chain, product lookups, or in retail, real-time couponing. And that's an actual trend that I noticed quite a bit when I spent time at Hortonworks, is that a lot of the payment processing applications were being moved to the retail store, to the edge, so to speak, because computing power has kind of grown every year, and there's an ability to cram more functionality into applications that can process that data and then basically push back the results of the processing to the data center. Now, there are quite a few use cases here as well. Connected car is one that that we do some degree of work on at Platform 9. But the idea is that if you're a self-driving car and that's got like a Tesla, for instance, it has its own an ability to you can put in a small server in there with 3 or 4 CPUs, Intel NUCs as they're called, and the car doesn't have to connect back to the cloud to process any kind of data, right? Tesla is the app, if you will, the car itself. And what if you could basically process data as the car, did its thing in the day, as a driver, the number of miles driven, the driving patterns, the charging, etc. And when you basically dock back at your garage at night, it can connect to the cloud and send the results of that processing, the subset of the processing back. So the core point is that you don't want the car to be asking the cloud all the time what to do, right? You want to be able to take autonomous decisions based on what the app is seeing at the point of at the edge, which is a driver, which is a car itself. The other example beyond your classical retail, restaurants, and connected cars, industrial automation. So for those of you who are in the manufacturing space, you might have heard of Industry 5.0. Basically means that if I've seen some really cool technology where in industrial processes, adjusting of machines based on the environment or the quality of the material that's coming in, monitoring shop floor processes more quickly with a view to expanding the operational efficiency of the machine and being able to tweak it, right? That's a use case. The other one that is quite interesting that I've seen some startups work on is AR and VR, right? Basically, the idea is that you're doing a lot of understanding of your current environment for augmented reality, virtual reality type applications. But can you not just do that right at the edge, but also I've seen DevOps pipelines being hooked to the AR VR feed, because the idea is that these applications have to be highly dynamic and sometimes need to change on a daily basis, whether it's a fix or a feature or whatever have you. How do you basically control your pipeline to be able to do that? So there's things like service meshes with Kubernetes, things like Istio, Linkerd, as well as a lot of microservice-based architectures that are being created. It's pretty much impossible this day and age to create edge architectures that don't use agile techniques and DevOps methodologies and microservices as their foundation. Now, having spoken about all of these, there's a plethora of use cases out there. I just wrote a blog on 5G about a month ago, and edge computing is in some ways a subset of 5G. And there's 3 basic types of use cases there, right? There's the ability to machine-to-machine communication, massive machine-to-machine communication, M2M. The other is low latency communication, right? Which means that you want to be able to communicate between autonomous vehicles or AR, VR, industry automation, smart cities. And the third is enhanced mobile broadband. So all the things that we're doing at home with 3D video streaming, Zoom, work from home, et cetera, fall in that bucket. And Edge pretty much covers a huge scale of that right now. There's all the business reality of where we are. And if you don't have edge computing, your competitors are going to have that. And they're going to basically do what Amazon did to do to you what an Amazon did to a Bed Bath and Beyond or other retailers, right? And I can speak about this from a personal standpoint because at Red Hat, we're trying to get a lot of these retailers to transform, but they won't, because they never viewed Amazon as a viable threat or as a competitive threat to them. They felt that people were always coming to stores. People would not really go for not buy stuff online if they, that shopping was a more physical experience. Again, that was a reason for them not to invest in IT to stay ahead and not be paranoid. And in the end, that didn't really work all that well. So given all of this, the business goodness, what are some of the key benefits, right? Getting to the point in the slide. Number one, your apps are faster to respond, given the fact that they're not talking to a remote server all the time, adding in the round trip latency. The app can respond to the user much faster and seem more responsive. At the same time, help the user figure out whatever it is that they want to do. Now, when I say faster responsive time in banking, I've seen use cases where you're trying to do the next best action for a customer that's walked into a retail banking office as well. So customer journeys are something I spend a lot of my time on. But faster response time basically means that it isn't just for the end customer, but also for an agent helping the customer, which leads us to the next one, reliable operations. So some of you might have seen all of this press around air-gapped computing. So air-gapped computing is computing that happens in remote sites. So for instance, if I'm in an oil rig and I have an insurance claim in an oil rig, in the past, I had to send a person up there, and that would cost me quite a bit of money and time. And I'd have to hire the expensive human resource. Now I'll just send a drone up there. So I saw insurers like Nationwide send drones to remote sites. But at times, a drone can lose contact with the mothership or the data center, but that's fine, right? It can take its pictures, and when it flies back into an area which has got connectivity, it can reconnect. But the idea with the edge is that the application running in the drone or running in the remote shop floor or the oil rig has the autonomy to continue to operate even with loss of connectivity. And security and compliance are other strand here. At some point, you'll have data that's going to be traversing cloud boundaries, but you got to invest in secure communications and all that good stuff. You need to do mass customer specific data or customer identifying data, so on and so forth. But as you're doing all of this, the main thing you're going to do is you're going to lower your capital expenditure, which is what the industry is headed to. You want to basically not have massive project outlays up at front, but have more predictable and more dynamic and more adjustable billing based on what you're leveraging in the cloud or in terms of the app or whatever have you. But the other area is that you got to interoperate with legacy clouds, legacy apps, legacy devices. That's just a reality. The other important part is with cloud computing and with Kubernetes, we're talking about a model where you're scaling horizontally, which means that instead of having 3 or 4 massive servers processing whatever it is that you're processing, you're going to have a bunch of smaller machines that are typically may or may not be pizza box servers, but something like Kubernetes handles all of as soon as you rack and stack equipment or you add more nodes to your cluster, Kubernetes rebalances the application, leverages the increasing capacity, and is able to scale up and down, right? And one industry where this is extremely important is retail. Retail experiences a rush during shopping season like no other. So you could have all these bursty hours where you're having to provision more servers. At the same time, when the traffic kind of falls off, you want to be able to deprovision them gracefully using a policy. And you want to make sure that this is not a manual task. And a lot of this can be done just in the framework itself. So with that in mind, Ravi, are there any questions or can we keep going to the next slide? So can you guys still hear me?
Sorry, Vamsi, I was double muted. I apologize. So I have a couple of questions. So
Sure.
Hugh is new to edge computing like I am. So Hugh is just sharing his understanding of what we've learned so far. And if you could correct us if we misunderstood. So what Hugh's saying is, look, essentially edge computing enables faster response time and less crashes on the storefront and customer and business applications. For example, a cash register, which also scans the item and never goes down because it has a separate backup battery compared to a standard cash register that can jam closed and cause shopping inconvenience. So he's just trying to build a bridge or an analogy between, another scenario to try and understand is that analogy kind of on the right lines.
Yes, sir, it is. It's 100% right, because when you look at edge computing architectures, for those of you who've been in like big data and you've basically noticed and worked with, Hadoop, you'll see that one of the cool things that Hadoop brought to the equation was you could give a piece of data to Hadoop and you could tell it the number of copies or replicas for it to store. And even if a certain server went down, Hadoop would make sure that, for instance, if you had a customer's profile information, you could tell it to store, or maybe for 1,000 customers, you could tell Hadoop that you want to keep 3 copies of it live at any point in time. And even if 2 servers go down, Hadoop would restart a box, install Hadoop on it, and put the piece of data on there, replicate it in Hadoop speak, and then have that be available so that you have no downtime. So Kubernetes does something very similar. That's your backup battery. Again, one of the things that you have to keep in mind is, by default, a system like Kubernetes is designed to be handling all of these illities, right? Reliability, high availability, failover management that programmers had to code in the application in the Kubernetes framework itself. So by design, everything's supposed to be self-balanced. It is self-scale, self-restored. But one other thing to keep in mind is you still have to do things in your application for it to be able to handle, an occasional failure. But if you design your app to be microservice based and based on the on Docker containers, and you deploy it to Kubernetes, Kubernetes completely handles the failover of that for you. So there is basically 2 ways to do it. Hugh, to your question, if you're running in one store, you could basically create a number of pods. A pod in Kubernetes is basically your analog to a virtual machine. And if a certain pod goes down, Kubernetes has an abstraction of what is called a service. And another pod is basically available to take requests coming into that service, or it'll start a new pod up for you. So your question is right. You basically have to be able to rely on Kubernetes. And one of the things that I do want to talk about in one of the slides is SREs, right? Site reliability engineering. And it's a bit of dark art and science. But the idea is that when you're developing your application using agile principles, you're still putting in place a lot of the principles that Netflix developed when they basically developed Chaos Monkey, which is the idea that failures are going to happen no matter what. And one of the key testing deliverables that should be part of the project is chaos testing, which is periodically taking down your servers at will and trying to see if the application can recover. So that's going to be key as well from a software development perspective. Again, all this is about cutting the risk out that you're going to have something to handle in production, in busy season. But again, long-winded answer, but I hope that answered the question.
Very good. Thank you, Vamsi. And Vamsi, I have an observation and a question. I guess a thought that came to my mind as you were talking about how important Kubernetes or similar capabilities are in retail. I can also think in today's world, it might apply to, let's say, DoorDash. So if there is a spike, if there is like a Super Bowl or some event where families want to get together in a safe way, maybe inside your bubble, you don't want to go to a restaurant. Maybe in Thanksgiving, DoorDash might experience a sudden spike. Maybe they may need something like this, or Instacart might experience a spike. So I was just connecting the dots that in the post-COVID era, there are maybe so many other companies or types of companies industry segments might benefit from this kind of thinking. I do have one question, Vamsi, from a fintech perspective. As I saw your background in fintech, one of our clients happens to be in the fintech space, and there is a seasonality to their business as well. So there are certain types of times of the year where there's a spike. Now their tech stack is, Azure, the Microsoft tech stack. So I'm sorry if this is a stupid question. Does Kubernetes play well with multiple providers? Like it doesn't matter whether it's AWS or Azure, or is it more closely tied to one tech stack over another?
No, it's a great question, right, Ravi? So it's a two-part answer to that. So Kubernetes plays well with all the different tech stacks, but if there is one dependency it has, it's the operating system. So even if you could use Azure Kubernetes service, which is a perfectly fine service. Like you could use Amazon Kubernetes service, AKS. Amazon's service called EKS, Elastic Kubernetes Service. Azure is called AKS. But I think even when you deploy in Azure, you're not deploying on Windows. You're deploying on Linux. And obviously you're able to get any kind of Linux you want on Azure as well, be it Red Hat, SUSE, CentOS, or Debian, whatever is your interest. But yeah, the short answer is yes, it plays well. It's designed to be API first. So there's no issue. And in telco especially, all the cloud providers have done either build native edge computing capabilities that will work on Linux, or in the case of Microsoft, they basically purchased a company called Affirm Networks, which is basically 5G at the edge, radio workloads. So, and again, tying back to your observation, Ravi, good point there, right? I'm working right now with two clients, two global clients. One is a big telco on streaming EPL games, right? English Premier League games are going to be streamed right from the point that they are played. And what the telco does is they basically drive in a WAN or a set of WANs with servers in them, racks of servers in them for the duration of the game, right? So that's a very popular use case, in fact, the video streaming use case. And the edge in that case would be either the truck, or if you're using mobile, it would be the radio tower, or in some cases a CDN as well. So one thing about the edge, and I think I owe a blog on this at some point in my personal blog, is there are many edges. So right in this picture, where I've got the restaurant or the edge of the store to the data center, there could be 4 or 5 different edges sitting in there. And depending on the latency that you can pay for, obviously the closer you're to the customer, you're gonna have to pay more in terms of the computing power you need or the real estate. There are companies like American Tower that just do buy and sell towers, right? All they do is they've got about 700 towers in the United States and Canada, and I'm sure more in Europe, et cetera. And all they're doing there is basically buying real estate closest to the metros, where people can rack in a few servers, create a cloud on the go, and then run your application. So, and that's what we try to do at Platform 9 as well, is take a collection of machines and turn that into a cloud. So into logical cloud.
Very good.
Yep.
Thank you, Vamsi.
You're welcome. So some definitions, right? The first one is, what is an edge application? This could be, obviously, right, as the name suggests, this is an application that is running on edge infrastructure. It could be any kind of application, right? Ravi mentioned fintechs. One of the things that I saw is a person walks into a bank, a retail customer. Your edge could be the ATM. It could be any retail banking kiosk, or even in some cases, a camera that is scanning the customer for certain features, right? And again, it raises all sorts of interesting privacy and security considerations. But the idea is the same. Customer walks in, you want to be able to do more with that customer in terms of identifying the customer and being able to increase your sale per customer, right? I mean, think about it. Banking is the most fundamental relationship we have. We've probably had bank accounts longer than most of us have been married. What that means is your bank has all your data. It knows, how much you make. It knows what your spending patterns are based on the credit card. But yet they don't do a great job of selling you mortgages selling you student loans, and all the different services that help them make money beyond just savings and checkings account. Because they have no ability to basically mine your data constantly to look for patterns. But the hope is that with Edge, they're going to be able to marry a lot of the agility they're putting into their apps with real time, backed up by real time customer events. So the other is Kubernetes. Kubernetes, for those of you who are new to the area, is the framework that runs Docker containers. Docker is a runtime representation of what a container looks like, but Kubernetes is what takes a bunch of containers and gets them to work from a core framework, from a network, and from a storage standpoint. And containers themselves are self-contained processes, right? The idea is that you could take a server running Linux or Windows and break it down into multiple slices of compute without having to do VMs. Of course, you can run containers on VMs as well, but that's another use case too. But a container by itself does not need a VM to run. When we say multi-tenancy, it basically means many customers or users that are going to be served out of one logical server, right? And then site reliability itself is a notion that you're basically going to have. It's a discipline, right? When I talk about SREs, there are companies now in that space like Gremlin or Blameless. And what site reliability does is that it tries to codify a set of processes, a discipline where you can make large-scale applications more efficient, more reliable, and more scalable, right? So a lot of the SRE concepts were driven out of Google, along with Kubernetes. And it's now just becoming a full-fledged domain where, as developers do more and more things in an automated fashion, the cloud is all about running thousands of workers as opposed to running a few big workers, right? Thousands of smaller workers. So if you're doing that, then the only way that's going to scale is via things like monitoring, automation, constant disaster response, as well as capacity planning. So site reliability has become a discipline now where they're like a bridge which takes between developers and operations, where you're taking a software mindset to basically run system administration. So Ravi, any questions, or can we move on to the next slide?
Yeah, there's one question from Patrick, Vamsi. So Patrick is asking, what is the edge? So my understanding, Vamsi, is edge is a boundary between the cloud and the end user. And based on the context, like one of the things you said, there could be 4 edges between the customer in the restaurant or the customer at the retail location and, let's say, the cloud. So is there a brief, succinct definition of how do you define edge?
Yeah, so good point, right? So the idea is the term edge right now is more marketing than anything else, as a buzzword, so to speak. But edge literally means the distance of the workload, whatever the workload is, right? I mentioned many edges. It's a physically separate geographical boundary. So why would I have multiple geographical boundaries, right? Let me take an example. So in the past, you didn't have that. You just had one core or edge, which was your data center. But now that you want to be able to respond faster to your users, you're basically going to run one or more edges. And each of these edges is basically a hardware device, typically a white box server, but could be anything, could be a gateway in IoT. So for those of you who work in industrial Internet of Things, you know what is called a gateway. Basically is a device that is a small server that is gathering information from hundreds of sensors or actuators or dumb devices that are out there, right? And these devices are constantly sending out time series data. But what drives the edge and what the definition of the edge is different for customer to customer. But the idea is that the first point of contact with the customer is your bleeding edge, so to speak, right? It's the edgiest edge. It basically collects information from the customer, does some bit of processing, and then based on the use case, it can send the data over to the next step. which is basically a set of servers running in a CDN to request information from those. And then the CDN can request information from a metro data center, which then requests information from a regional data center and the national data center. So by the time the final curated data is sent to the national data center, it's a subset of the data where the noise is all filtered out and you're just dealing with the actionable business information. So if the vision does come true where Amazon develops chips for Alexa, AI, right, then the edge becomes Alexa right there, right? And if Alexa needs to go to the Amazon cloud to request something or local distribution center, that'll be the edge number 2, right? And then so on and so forth. So again, the definition varies, but I think there's 2 things there. It's a geographic location where that workload is running, number 1. And number 2, it's going to be typically a combination of software and hardware. And how smart or how dumb depends on the industry vertical. Hope that helps.
Very good. Patrick, great question. Vamsi, thank you. Great answer. All right. We got about 10 minutes left, Vamsi, just for a quick time check.
Got it. So, again, when we talk about a cloud-based enterprise edge platform, there's probably 5 capabilities that you should be looking at. Number 1, you should be designing for security from the get-go. You should be basically, you need this as a fundamental capability, which is that you're managing security. Each customer is isolated from the other, and you're able to run hundreds of tenants, right, if needed, and have that work in a regional manner or a global manner, as you will. The second is you need to support the hybrid cloud, as shown in the bottom, right? It is basically it's basically a reiteration of the question that somebody asked, right? Hugh asked, which is that I need to work on Azure, I need to work on Amazon, I need to work on x86 servers, so on and so forth. The third is automation. You're looking at automation end to end, right? From how you configure your servers, how you provision, which means that you stand up your servers, how you tie your DevOps pipelines together, and how you update your apps and manage the microservice interactions, which is a service mesh. The next is microservices based. You're going to have microservice based architectures deployed in Kubernetes so that it radically simplifies all the site reliability stuff you've got to do, so on and so forth. And finally, simplified edge onboarding. The edge is about making sure that you don't have to send IT technicians to every retail store or to every factory floor. All you got to do is take a server, rack it up, and the server finds a mothership. It's booted up, operating systems installed on it, Kubernetes installed on it, the app is installed on it, and it's ready to go in 5 minutes or 4 or 3, whatever the time is, right? So again, these are, I think, some core technical architectural driving blocks to make sure the business can adopt and move with the edge. Ravi, next slide. So this is a slide that we built for a big retailer, right? When you look at what is involved in terms of life cycle of the edge, let's start with deployment, right? Which means that you want to be able to deploy, as I just described, the server and the app. So all of the stuff shown in the middle with the software installer, the physical appliance, or if it's a virtual appliance, and then being able to connect to the cloud, number 1. Number 2, if it warrants and you need more capacity, and maybe you want to keep a couple of extra servers in the rack in the store, you want to be able to scale them. And you want to be able to do them not using man hours, but just using automation. Number 3, upgrades. Every time you upgrade Kubernetes or your app or your appliance, you want to be able to do that in an automated, remote fashion. And then finally, all the care and maintenance, the repairing of nodes. At times hardware is going to fail, right? You're going to blow out a network card, or you're going to have some problem with storage. You're going to be able to do that just in a rack and stack manner and not have any manual intervention. So, but again, this is the life cycle of an edge deployment. And, all of the things that I mentioned in the previous slide with multi-tenancy, security are going to be important in that case. Ravi, next slide. So Ravi, at this point, I wanted to kind of have a dialogue with you in terms of what you think in terms of how this relates to what you guys at Smooth Apps do with your your agile practices, and what that means from, I can definitely add the technical color in terms of what this means for your pipelines and so on and so forth, but anything you want to add in terms of culture and things related to that?
Yeah, so Vamsi, I was thinking, I think the first thing is if I were to tie this to Scrum and product ownership, Ken Schwaber taught me that a professional Scrum product owner is really the chief value optimizer of the organization. And in our Scrum.org professional Scrum product owner class, we explore who is a better product owner. Is it a technical product owner or a non-technical product owner? And what Ken Schwaber taught me is, and to be a chief value optimizer, a product owner should be tech aware or tech savvy, but doesn't have to be technical in the sense of coding, right? Doesn't have to be somebody who knows Python coding or coded with Fortran 30 years ago. That kind of technical knowledge is actually more dangerous than beneficial. So how that relates to what you taught us today was, if a professional Scrum product owner is aware of the existence of edge applications, either in their industry or in adjacent industries, now what they can do is they can set expectations to their dev team and challenge their dev team to say, look, guys, here's the outcome I want for our business. Here is the outcome I want for our customers and users. Now, I'm not an expert on how to do it, and it might have seemed unreasonable in the legacy tech stack, but I just read an article about edge applications. I feel it's a game changer. Can you go take a look at it and see if or how this technology might better help us achieve our outcomes, right? So I think we need product owners who are tech aware, tech savvy, or if they themselves are not tech aware, we need the development team definitely to be aware of these. And when they come across a technology that's a game changer and that can help optimize value for the product, they need to bring it to the product owner, and the product owner must be receptive. So I think those are two immediate ideas that came to my mind. In terms of tying what we just learned back to Scrum, I feel that a couple of other things that came to my mind is, if the product owner is clear using evidence-based management techniques in terms of the outcomes they're trying to achieve. So if the fintech, the CEO of the bank is saying, look, guys, we are leaving money at the table. We're sitting on this gold mine of data of customer usage, but we are getting pennies on the dollar in terms of wallet share. And they issue a challenge that we need to increase revenue per customer from X dollars to Y dollars a year. Now that provides context for backlog refinement. And now in a Scrum backlog refinement, the dev team and the product owner together can figure out what might be possible, what do we want to achieve? And then you can tie that back to edge applications and say, well, this is possible if the moment the customer walks in, you get an alert. So backlog refinement is one place where edge application or edge computing could be integrated. And I think definition of done is another area. So right now, if you have a tech savvy dev team and they're aware of cutting edge technologies, they could actually improve their definition of done, which could be thought of as release readiness checklist, right? What are the bare minimum checks that must have been executed and passed before we deploy to production? Perhaps they could include checks related to Chaos Monkey or edge application into their DoD, so that you are building scalable solutions and resilient solutions right from the get-go, as opposed to trying to respond to a production outage and then retrofit edge computing ideas into your entire legacy code base. So Vamsi, those are a few ideas I had about marrying what you taught us with what I know. Any thoughts, reactions, or suggestions and I'd welcome feedback from our audience if you see any other connections or if you have questions.
No, I think it's a very valid point, right, Ravi? And one thing that came to mind when you were describing that so well was that in Denver about 2 years ago, we'd worked with a very large, let's say, telco, and the biggest challenge they faced, and they still face, is they got to reinvent their business to be more than just a dumb pipe, telco pipe offering, right? They wanted to be in the business of using the extensive reach that they've developed at every metro that mattered in the world. They were within a few milliseconds, right? And the way to do that would be to develop cutting edge applications, because that's where the money is, right? Software is going to eat hardware eventually, as Mark Andreessen said. So rightly said about 10 or 15 years ago. But the idea then is, can you basically develop apps that deal with, say, for instance, AR, VR? Can you offer, if you had a customer who was like a Panera Bread, for instance, could you basically, when you were cabling their store, could you basically also offer them a value-added service which would host edge applications for them at a low cost, and maybe potentially help them develop or onboard their applications? So what that means is a new way of looking at how you're basically going to do software development. So the basic, bringing in the best agile practice, the Scrum cycle, that's all table stakes, right? But again, on top of that, to be able to work with things like, agile tools, to be able to basically bring in, technologies such as Spinnaker or JenkinsX, using more Git-based development, and then also bringing in, all the complexity that provides this goodness is going to be at the development stage. You're going to then deal with not just developers and operations, but you're going to now deal with data scientists potentially, right? So how are they going to do their AI development? And it's as you said, it's being very open and receptive to these new techniques that you can use to create more topical and more customer relevant applications, right? Otherwise, you're not going to be able to compete with the fintechs or the cool startups, right? In offering these capabilities.
Very good. We might have time for just one or two more questions. So Bogdan has a question. Would you recommend an agile approach for preparing global scale edge-oriented solutions, or rather go for a standard strategic design, then go for agile development in multiple teams? Vamsi, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, it's a good question, right? Because I can comment about the technical. The answer is it depends, right? I'm one of those ones that went to B school for 3 years to figure out that the answer to most things in the world is that it depends. So depending on what you want to do with the platform, right? There's no 1 degree answer. But again, if it's global scale, absolutely agile would be recommended, right? I mean, it's a no-brainer. And then the design itself, it would depend on how the teams are constituted, how they're basically created. We've all heard of Conway's law, which is that organizations are split based on the location, right? So one thing I've seen is a certain team develops a certain part of the business functionality, and they're able to make their own design decisions to go with. And if a certain team wants to use Python and MongoDB, go for that. If another team wants to use Couchbase and Java, do that. But again, the way I look at it is the central architecture team that makes the design, architectural design, would probably be a benevolent dictatorship, right? What I mean by that is you want to be able to prescriptively lay down some things, but at the same time, you want to preserve the freedom that these different teams, the autonomy that the teams want to have, without making sure, but make sure it doesn't turn to Wild West. Because when it does that, when they pick too many products and they're doing too many things, open source technologies, you'll end up with sprawl that is going to be a pain to maintain going forward. So again, in my mind, Ravi, let me toss the structure of the teams to you. I would start with a global design, and I would try to do design scrums, architecture scrums, keep the design kind of like the like they say the English Parliament, right? It's flexible, but it's not too flexible, right? It's got the right mix, and it can bend to based on what to the outcomes that the business wants.
Yeah, Vamsi, I want to add on to what you said. So Bogdan, great question. One thing I learned from Ken Schwaber was ask the team. You've got to ask the team, because his philosophy and the idea of self-organization and one of the agile principles is that the best answers live in the minds of people who are closest to the work. And at the same time, there is a tension. The tension is, if I'm working in a large organization with 350 teams, or maybe a Charles Schwab that acquired TD Ameritrade, maybe they have 500 teams. If every team is making their own decisions, then it doesn't scale up to a 500 team organization. So how do you create that benevolent dictatorship without violating the core principles and values of the Agile Manifesto and self-organization? So one possibility, one pattern that I have learned about, when in the Scrum.org Scale Professional Scrum course is we could create an architecture community of practice. So if there is clarity about the business outcomes and the business outcomes are non-negotiable, following the laws of the land are non-negotiable, ethics are non-negotiable, and so on, the organization can set a bounded context to say, guys, you have to find the destination, find the best path to the destination. The destination is non-negotiable, and here are some boundaries that are non-negotiable. Now you have the autonomy to achieve the best paths to the destination within the boundaries. And the architecture community of practice can set the boundaries. So for instance, we are only going to host all our solutions on Azure. We're going to use Kubernetes, blah, blah, blah. And so here are the things which are cast in concrete, and here are the things where you can play and have autonomy. So that way, it's not an architecture center of excellence, which is comprised of architects who no longer have their hands on the code. Rather, it's an architecture community of practice where architects, the enterprise architect, if you have a role like that, they are really the curators of the wisdom of the team, of the community, as opposed to the creators of the wisdom or the dictators. So Martin Fowler, I think, has written a good article on what is the role of an architect in an agile context. So maybe that might guide you. So thrown a whole bunch of ideas there. I hope, Bogdan, that it answered your question. And I think that brings us to the end of this conversation. So as we wrap up, Vamsi, any closing thoughts? You introduced us to a very complex set of topics today. If people wanted to learn more, what would you recommend to them?
No, so number one, these are some resources for you all to look at. And, I write about this in my blog. The thing I try to do is try to keep my blog very topical and real world, right? So check that out. Check out the Network World, Wikipedias, and the CB Insights as well. And you'll see more and more about edge computing in the months and the years to come, right? The one thing I would recommend is that some of the things I spoke about in terms of SRE work, in terms of hybrid cloud, in terms of Kubernetes, they're going to be the mainframe of the next coming generation, right? Which is that right now, maybe 5% of industry apps, or maybe even less than that, are running on containers, but that would exponentially increase in the years to come. So invest in learning those. There's some really good books on Amazon about Kubernetes. A lot of blogs available out there. But again, these are some resources to look at. And if you have any questions, just send Ravi or me an email, and we'd be glad to respond.
Perfect. Vamsi, thank you so much for introducing us to this whole new world, and for being kind and dumbing it down for us. And I would encourage folks to connect with Vamsi on LinkedIn. If you found this useful, give him a shout out. And if you want to continue the conversation, maybe you can post some questions on LinkedIn and we can continue the conversation so many other people can also benefit. So with that, I want to thank you all. Stay safe, stay calm, and thank you. Keep calm and scrum on. And I will see you at the next Agile DevOps DFW. Until then, thank you and goodbye.
Great. Thanks, everyone.